Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for our webinar today, taking place during Mental Health Month. My name is Josh Vitale, and I'm the steering committee chair for this initiative. What started as a regional initiative in Kansas City in 2019 has grown to a nationwide effort to bring awareness to the epidemic of suicide in the construction industry, with a goal of saving lives. In 2024, more than 700 organizations representing nearly 500,000 workers across all 50 states and U.S. territories participated in Construction Suicide Prevention Week. And we're already on track to exceed those numbers this year. If you haven't already, please be sure to register your company's participation on our website and receive your OSHA recognized certificate. That's at www.constructionsuicideprevention.com. With approximately 7.5 million people employed in the construction industry in the US and far more worldwide, we still have more people who need access to the tools that could save a life and reverse the trend that has placed construction in an industry with one of the highest rates of death by suicide. The Construction Suicide Prevention Week initiative provides free resources to people in and around the construction industry to help them start conversations, hold stand-down events, and share information with colleagues who may be struggling. Our goal is to put more tools in the hands of the people who build our communities, and this webinar is one of those resources that we're proud to be able to provide. We want today to be interactive, so please feel free to submit questions through the chat or the Q&A. Now, let's get to today's program. Our speaker today is Stephanie Lemek. Stephanie is a nationally recognized leader in workplace mental health, specializing in creating trauma-informed cultures and supporting high-risk industries like construction. As the founder and CEO of the Wounded Workforce, she helps organizations navigate the intersection of mental health, safety, and leadership to build resilient and engaged teams. Prior to founding the Wounded Workforce, Stephanie spent nearly 2 decades in-house as an HR professional, with 10 of those years supporting the construction industry directly. Stephanie's approach is practical, research-backed, and tailored to the realities of the job site. She blends industry insights with actionable strategies, equipping leaders with the tools they need to foster a culture where mental health is prioritized without disrupting productivity or performance. When she's not advocating for mental health in construction, Stephanie is a dedicated entrepreneur, writer, coach, and passionate about helping organizations create workplaces where employees can truly thrive. Please welcome Stephanie.
Gosh, thank you so much. What a wonderful and kind introduction. I am so thrilled that all of you are able to join us today. I'm going to go ahead and get started and dive in to our presentation. So obviously, we are talking about how we can move from crisis to culture shift. We recognize in the construction industry that we have a serious challenge as it relates to suicide and also drug use and drug overdose deaths specifically. And, when we pull back, many of you are familiar with the story. The storyline here is, this information came initially from research done by the CDC highlighting the serious issue we have in the industry. And thankfully, many people, many organizations, including Construction Suicide Prevention Week, are focused on how we can help change the state of this crisis. And what I really want to talk about today is how we move past working to prevent crises to really a full culture shift in the industry and focusing on building a resilient workforce, a mentally healthy, a mentally strong workforce that also can help attract and retain talent. Every construction professional I talk to shares a lot about the challenges we face in terms of having that strong, healthy workplace that people want to join and we need for all the projects to come. Josh gave a absolutely incredible introduction about me, so I will keep it really brief. But as Josh shared, I am the founder and CEO of the Wounded Workforce. This is an organization really born out of a passion to make workplaces healthier and work better for everyone, for leaders, for organizations, for stakeholders, and really basing it in data, information, research that has been leveraged heavily within, scientific communities, research communities, and translating that to action that really makes sense to those audiences. And you'll hear me talk about it a lot today. Making sure we're speaking the language of the folks we're trying to support is so important. So that's really the key aspect of where I see myself in this organization. And I have to throw in there, I am proud to say that the Wounded Workforce is thrilled to be a presenting sponsor for Construction Suicide Prevention Week this year. If you are not signed up to participate, I highly encourage it. The resources, the work that's being done is absolutely amazing. And if you have the capacity to be a sponsor as well, it's absolutely worthwhile. So let's dig in. Let's talk about the state of mental health in construction. And I wanted to share some newer statistics with this group. I'm guessing, folks who are spending time on a Wednesday talking about mental health in construction, you probably have a pretty strong idea of some of those initial statistics that we know about, that we've seen in the construction industry from that initial research that I referenced. You may have heard of, a frequently cited one that, construction fatalities from the Fatal Four, looking at that, the rate of suicide deaths are 5 times that combined in the construction industry. And, some of those statistics are, about 4 or 5 years old now. So thankfully, we have some updated data from CPWR to reference here. And just looking again at crises factors, 16 times more fatal overdoses than fatal industry injuries within the construction industry, and 5 times more deaths by suicide is what we saw in 2023. So clearly, we continue to have a crisis as it relates to supporting mental health and supporting people who are experiencing potential fatalities when it comes to mental health challenges and crises in the construction industry. It is so important that we continue to monitor and understand our progress here, especially in the most serious challenges. And it's so important that we continue to do the work of suicide prevention and preventing overdose deaths as well. And there are thankfully a ton of resources around that. A question I often get is why construction? And I get why construction in a variety of different ways. So I hear sometimes from people who know that I do work outside of the construction industry as it relates to workplace mental health. Stephanie, why the focus in construction? Well, Josh talked about it a little bit as we were introducing this call. The construction industry, it's kind of the lifeblood of our communities. These are the people building the communities we live in. This is a massive group of people that are impacted, and we see the statistics that show that the need for additional support. So that's my why in terms of why construction, and that connection back to the work that I was able to do when supporting the industry directly in my career. But when we think about why does construction have such a challenging relationship with mental health? I tend to point to 3 things that I like to call out. And these are kind of 3 buckets we'll talk about holistically. And the first is job-related stressors. So this is probably what most people think about when we think about why is mental health, so challenging in construction. We'll talk about a physically challenging job, physical exertion, and then those safety considerations. I'm sure all of us have heard the old adage, the job is trying to find new ways to kill you. Um, that's stressful. That's a lot of mental weight to carry in our work. And then, heaven forbid, we do have a safety incident at work, whether that's directly impacting you or you witnessed it, that has mental health considerations as well. This work is also incredibly stressful. Tight deadlines, quality issue, difficult contracts, difficult um, owners. I joke lovingly to many of the folks that I work with that professionals in the construction industry are really professional problem solvers. And with that, problems are kind of coming at you from every angle. And that stressful work really can take its toll, especially if we're not stopping and taking time to really take a step back and reduce that stress, manage that in a productive way. Also, this may be one that a lot of folks aren't necessarily thinking about, but loneliness is another aspect of job-related stressors that I think is really significant in the construction industry. And many of you may have heard the previous US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murphy. He penned a mental health warning, a Surgeon General's warning about the state of loneliness in the United States. Well, loneliness and the loneliness crisis certainly comes into play in construction. And you may think, I'm out there on the job with so many people I care about, all those things. Absolutely. And I hope that that is the case. And we'll talk more about the importance of that later. But think about loneliness as we think about, have you ever been on a job where you were away from your family and your friends? You had to travel for that work. You had to be away from your home base. And even if you haven't, have you ever had really long hours? It's kind of almost silly asking the question, have you ever had really long hours? Because the answer is almost certainly yes. And those really long hours may keep you from being able to spend time with your friends, family. Perhaps you're not able to kind of tuck your kids in when you get home from the job. So these things add to that state of loneliness and have real impacts as it relates to mental health overall. Something that comes up a little bit less often, though, when we talk about mental health in the construction industry is the other two things I like to point to. And first and foremost is demographics. Let's talk about the demographics of the construction industry and how what we know about those demographics helps us better understand some of the challenges that we face. And we know from lots of data from a variety of sources that men die by suicide at a much higher rate. And we know that the construction industry, we know that the trades specifically are very highly male dominated industries. And then when we pull back that statistic a little bit more, we see that Native American men and white men have those highest incidences of deaths by suicide. We also know that veterans often transition from the military and have very successful careers in the construction industry. It is one of the things that I get really excited about. My father is a disabled veteran. I love seeing that transition happen for those veteran populations. However, veteran populations do show statistically higher instances of trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. And post-traumatic stress disorder, as many of us likely know, is a diagnosable mental health condition. And so these things can tie into some of why those challenges are more prominent in the industry, simply based on the demographics of the industry and what we know about mental health demographics overall. And lastly, and this one gets me kind of excited because it's getting to us to talk about the changing state of the industry and why obviously we want to address this crisis we face. We want to build mentally healthy workplaces, but also how that can help us address some of the unique challenges, especially when it comes to talent that the industry faces. So generally, when I'm in a room full of construction professionals and I ask, have you ever had a hard time finding talented individuals to come work on your job sites? There are chuckles and lots of raised hands. We know the construction industry has been struggling with talent shortages, skilled talent shortages for decades. This is something my entire career we've been talking about. The impending, talent shortage in construction. So as we look to continue to address that, and I know we're excited to see some great progress here, it's important to recognize that building mentally healthy, overall healthy and well organizations, jobs, has a huge impact in our ability to attract and retain workers overall. Also, let's talk about those younger workers. I love talking about, Gen Z and the young workers coming into the industry. Maybe it's because I'm a millennial and we got a whole lot of hard times as we were entering the workplace. But if you thought millennials were challenging, I have to tell you, Gen Z is something even more interesting. Gen Z has a very different approach in terms of mental health, work-life balance, their expectations of where work and their life fit together. And one of my favorite statistics to reference, it's kind of a jaw dropper, is about 2 years ago, Monster.com did a survey of Gen Z new grads. And in that survey, 92% of those Gen Z new grads expected to be able to talk about mental health at work. So, as Gen Z, as younger generations are entering the workforce, they are going to be pushing us to have a much different conversation around mental health, mental well being, how life and work fit together. And last but certainly not least, increases in diversity. We know we're seeing more women in construction. We're seeing a wider variety of experiences, backgrounds in the construction industry, which is great because it's helping us build that talent pipeline. As we get more diverse, we need more resources to build out that mentally healthy, that emotionally healthy, that engaged workplace. So really, this is not only an imperative for a moral reason to truly address why, people are losing their lives. It is also an imperative because it is a key in creating the construction industry, the construction workplace of the future that makes it, where folks want to come to work and help build our communities, which is pretty cool. So one thing that is amazing is all of the industry action that we've seen over the course of, call it the last 5 years, related specifically to suicide prevention, to addressing addiction, substance abuse, overdose deaths. And so it is so important as we think about shifting to a change in culture, a resilient culture, we are building on that industry action. And this is as simple as leveraging those resources that are available to you. It is so exciting, especially me. I'm kind of a nerd. I like the data, I like the resources. It's so amazing to see all of these incredible resources available for anyone in the industry to access, by and large, for free to get to those things to address, whether it is preventive care, whether it is something to address crises, all of these different things are really powerful. And I have this QR code on the screen. What that is I have a free downloadable one pager that has a whole host of construction, mental health resources that you can download for free for your teams. You can access that on the website and it'll take you to all sorts of different resources. I don't want your email. I don't want anything. I want you to be able to leverage the resources that are already available. And I know what can be challenging is there's a lot of resources. So how do we navigate through that? And that can become important. But make sure you're taking advantage as a first step, those resources that are available to build out those programs to move from crisis to that proactive preventative action and really focus on that. And then that way, we're also not recreating the real, we're building out a really robust culture change within the industry. So we have all these great resources. We have all this amazing work that's being done by amazing people focused on reducing the crisis that we're seeing related to mental health in construction. So why are we still having such a hard time talking about mental health in the construction industry? And don't tell me we're not, because I know, and talking to my clients and talking to folks out in the industry, we have a lot of people with their arms crossed, not ready to talk about it. We have a lot of people saying, I don't need to talk about mental health. I'm not crazy. I always hate hearing that. But unfortunately, we are still hearing that, and from a lot of people. And really, what it is stigma. I think one of the biggest challenges we face, especially at this phase of action as we're working to address mental health in the construction industry, is stigma. We have all this amazing work by the folks who are willing to raise their hand, to have the hard conversations, to help their peers, to talk about their own experiences with mental health. But we still have a lot of the industry with their arms kind of crossed, not ready to have conversations about mental health. And there's a lot that feeds into it. And the thing that I hear most frequently is kind of that tough guy, macho, I don't need help. I don't need anything to work past this. And this is the biggest thing that's going to get in our way of culture change. When we think about meaningful culture change, we have to be able to talk about things. We have to have those normalizing conversations. So that leads me to the question is how do we smash through stigma? How do we change the way we are talking about mental health in construction? And I don't mean a handful of us. I don't mean the folks that are doing the really amazing work that's already happening. I mean everyone. I mean that 70% of folks out on the job sites, your foremen, your superintendents, who maybe are those folks who have that commentary around mental health that's maybe not as helpful. How do we change that? And I feel like I have a pretty good place to start. And I think it's leveraging what works really well in construction. Construction professionals are problem solvers. We're smart, we're innovative, we want to take new information and understand it and do better. Well, what's amazing is we know so much more about the brain now. We've learned so much more about neuroscience, how our bodies work and respond to different things like trauma, like information, like external stressors. We know more about toxic stress. So, why don't we do a good job at talking to the industry about that? Why don't we shape that information, that new information, and share it with our teams and change the way they think? Because we can present them with the new information or newer information to better understand what mental health really is and how we can talk about it. And this is one of my favorite places to start whenever I'm talking with a team about mental health in the industry. And it's with this mental health continuum. A lot of us think about mental health, and we may hear folks talk about mental health and use that as synonymous with a mental health challenge or a mental health disorder or illness. You say mental health, someone thinks depression, anxiety, eating disorder, OCD, schizophrenia. But the thing is, just like physical health, we all have mental health. And I think really focusing on shifting that language is key in helping us build that stigma reduction and really build that change in culture and conversations we're having. So this mental health continuum is really great because we can talk about, diagnosable mental illness or disorders or lack of diagnosable mental illness and disorders, and then also talk about mental well-being and how someone who has a diagnosable mental illness or disorder can have really high mental well-being. They can be doing really well. They may have different resources where they are able to manage their illness and they're having high mental well-being. On the flip side, we can talk about someone who maybe has no diagnosable illness. We are not seeing something where a psychologist would say, oh, you have anxiety, you have depression, but you may be experiencing low levels of mental well-being. Think about it as those like hard times we all experience in our life. I had someone one time I asked, what does trauma mean to you? And it was like the crap that happens to all of us sometimes in our life. Well, that's what happens is we all experience moments of minimal mental well-being and maximum mental well-being. And we kind of move along that axis through our lives. How can we ensure that we're experiencing those higher levels of mental well being? How can we be thoughtful about that? How can we get proactive about that? Which is really how we shape the conversation and how we change how we're talking about and thinking about mental health. I love this. This is one of my favorite tools to change how we're discussing mental health because I think it changes the game. It kind of allows ourselves to plot ourselves at any point in this line, and that place can change over time. And that allows us to get folks connected to resources, tools, self care, building resilient practices, building that mental health, mental toughness without them ever having to feel as though they are being diagnosed. They may be. And I encourage folks who, do have a mental illness or disorder or feel they might to get diagnosed. I have a diagnosis, but I think it's really important to give this wider range of experience to really reshape how we're able to have these conversations. And what's beautiful is the science, the data backs us up on this. So let's talk about how we build that culture. I know many of you want to talk about what actions can we take to start to build this culture of resilience, to shift to a culture change in our organization. Well, let's first start with what is resilience. I'm a big definition person. I like to make sure that we are all on the same page. So I think, oftentimes when I'm speaking, when I'm training, I love to make sure we talk about definitions, even if they're words that we use pretty frequently, because oftentimes there are these small differences in what we mean when we address a term, and sometimes there are really big differences in interpretations. And that can lead to challenges, problems, confusion, and we don't need that when it comes to addressing mental health. So, resilience is a term that gets thrown around a lot. But importantly, resilience is about how we adapt and bounce back from adversity, challenges, or setbacks. It is not about avoiding difficulties. It's not about avoiding those stress, those challenges that are absolutely going to come up in all of our lives. And they're absolutely going to come up on our job sites. What is it? What it's about is being able to identify and leverage our personal strengths, our resources, our support, tools to overcome those challenges and setbacks. And that allows you to grow and continue to move forward. Resilience can help us maintain a more positive outlook on our lives, on challenges we face, and recover more quickly from stress or hardship. Resilience is like weightlifting. This is maybe a silly analogy, but think about it. As you're lifting the weights, your muscles are experiencing these tiny little injuries, and you're getting stronger over time. And you can only build your ability to lift something heavier by experiencing those challenges. So, someone who's never experienced any adversity, challenges, or setbacks in their life, technically they can't have resilience. We can't have resilience. We can't build resilience without those challenges. And so that's really key. I think that's something that we overlooked. And I also think we overlook that it's something we grow. It is something we build. It's something that we can continue to iterate on. It's not something inherent to our personality. It is something that we can work to do. It's also something that we can work to do and build organizationally. I'm going to get back to the nerdy science thing again and talk about something that gets me really excited and talk about something that really kind of doubles down on that concept of resilience and why it's so important. And some of you may have heard of, a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And I'm going to talk about kind of the neuroscience behind that and the really cool information, the really cool things we've learned about our brain in recent years. And it's that you may have heard the kind of crummy old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's sort of mean, but it's also not true. So we have found that through science has proven you can, in fact, teach anyone at any age new things. And throughout our entire lives, our brains are creating new neural pathways. So when we focus on that growth mindset, when we focus on learning, when we focus on resilience, bouncing back, doing better, learning more, we are investing in growing our minds and building so much more for ourselves. And this really adds to our overall mental well being and sense of self efficacy. And what this is called is neuroplasticity, kind of a mouthful. But it's really that idea of a growth mindset being proven by science to work. We understand that when we invest in, when we try new things, when we bounce back and invest in resilience, we do better, we grow, we do more. And that lasts our entire lifetimes. So I love talking about that because I never want to hear people, think that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can't change. You can't grow. If you've had a mental health challenge, if you've experienced trauma, that at some point in your life, it's not worth addressing. It always is. And there's always that opportunity to have that growth and have that post-traumatic growth. So it's really incredible just to understand what our brains are capable of and how that can impact us all. So, with that growth mindset, understanding neuroplasticity, understanding that we want to build a resilient culture, we want to focus on this culture change. What actions can you take? Can you go back to your team with today, tomorrow, this month? Well, I would be a terrible former HR leader if I didn't say that it's so important for our leaders to set the tone. Culture flows from the top. And especially when we're looking at challenges like mental health, where folks are perhaps concerned about whether or not it's okay to talk about their challenges, whether it's okay to share what's going on. A lot of people, a lot of data showcases folks are worried about, disclosing challenges or expressing concerns because they're worried it might impact their jobs. Whether, folks think they are, tough enough for a promotion, for a new challenge, or whether they're able to even do the jobs overall. That's a big hurdle to overcome, especially when we think about, folks, by and large, we are working to care for ourselves and our families. So when people think there may be an impact to their work, to their ability to do that work and earn that income to care for themselves, that's a big hurdle to overcome. So when we focus on how we make sure leaders are empowered to talk about mental health in the right way and make sure they are displaying that vulnerability in the right way as well is really key. And a question to ask yourself is, do your job site leaders have the right skills and the right tools to have the right conversations around mental health? And you may feel really good about the state of your job site leaders. And I am super excited if that's the case. I know there's some amazing work, amazing training, amazing resources out there in the industry, which is fantastic. But it's also important to ensure that you're being thoughtful about this because the tone, the conversation, all of the things that are happening on each of your job sites, on each of your crews, that leader has a huge impact on the overall tone and culture of the organization. And I know vulnerability is a tricky thing to talk about. And I know sometimes when we talk about vulnerability as leaders, it can feel like, oh, I don't want to make people feel like they have to disclose things, or I don't want people to feel like, oh, this isn't, I don't feel comfortable. I don't think we need to. I think vulnerability is really personal. And I think going to that level of comfort is key. And vulnerability in leadership setting the tone around mental health can look at like many different things. It may look like someone sharing their own lived experience with, suicide, substance abuse, mental health challenges, mental health diagnosis. It could also sound like someone sharing, oh, I've got a teenager and, they sure are crabby. It kind of, gets me down sometimes. Or it's, oh, I can't, hang out after work today because I've got to go and catch my daughter's soccer game. It's just vulnerability is about showing your humanity. And so when I talk about vulnerability, when we talk to leaders about vulnerability, know that there's a range and there's a spectrum, and we can build up to what we feel comfortable with. But as we invest in that, as we work on that skill, we can continue to get more vulnerable with each other. So don't pressure your leaders to share things they're not ready to, because I actually think that does more harm than good. Instead, think about vulnerability and how folks can share how they're human, how they're a person, how they show up personally. And I'm guessing, without even thinking about it deliberately, a lot of your team members are already doing this. There are strong connections that form on our job sites, on our teams. We're spending a lot of time working with these folks. So make sure you're thinking about that vulnerability in a way that connects back to that tone and how we're setting the tone of our organization around mental health, mental well-being. There is a specific quote that I love to use to talk about culture, and it's a thinker. It's one that really kind of you have to sit with. Is the culture of your organization is defined by the worst behavior you're willing to tolerate. And I think as we think about mental health, as we think about culture and culture shift and construction, I think this is an important one for us to think about. And what are you willing to tolerate? And what is your organization willing to tolerate versus what you want to promote? I think both of those things are really key here. So, some action items you can take as it relates to that leadership focus is make sure you're training your leaders to understand what mental health is and isn't, first of all, but then also to spot challenges and distress. Even as simple as, hey, you don't seem like yourself. What's going on? Make sure your leaders know their teams. And this is a huge help in doing this. Make sure you're dismantling that kind of tough it out or tough guy mindset by modeling vulnerability, by sharing stories, by sharing the fact that this is something that we don't need to continue. And then make sure you're modeling open, safe communication across your organization and leadership teams. Next, one of my favorite things about talking about mental health, about talking about trauma-informed workplaces and construction, is the amazing safety culture that already exists in almost every construction organization I know. So leverage that safety culture, leverage those programs to shape and reshape the conversations around mental health. And many of you are already doing this. And I know there are so many amazing safety professionals who are engaged in this conversation because they understand, they know, they see the impact here. Safety and mental health are interconnected. We know that stress impacts focus and risk. We know there are things, especially when we look at crises, that can directly impact safety on the job site. We can also use safety and that lens to integrate short and frequent messages to, again, reduce stigma, change the conversation around mental health overall. And we also can share peer stories to reduce stigma as well. I know this one's a little bit more challenging. This is kind of that advanced level. It depends on where folks are willing and able to share that, story and but make sure you're creating that avenue, creating a space that's safe for them to do that and letting that build. You can also leverage a lot of the amazing stories that are being shared across the organizations that I referenced earlier. One of my favorite resources, the AGC has a fantastic page that shares several lived experience stories as well. You can start there and then use that to motivate those peer stories, that peer recognition as well. Next, leverage those support structures. Leverage those things can help folks and help their mental health. Peer support is something that we know that can be the most impactful. And what I mean when I say peer support is, the person next to me, the person who has, a similar experience, the same experience as me, and can talk to me about, what I'm experiencing, what I've been to. Peer support is amazing and impactful. And really making sure we're finding ways to connect folks, connect community is really powerful as well. Also, make sure you're engaging in employee listening and other forms of feedback. Employee listening is basically hearing what your teams have to say. It is getting information from the field, from your crews, understanding and acting on that as much as possible. And listen, I get it. We can't do everything all at once. Sometimes acting on feedback is saying, I hear you. We can't take action right now, but this is on our radar. That counts as well. Employee listening could look like a survey. It could look like conversations you're having out with your crews. It can look like town halls. Employee listening can look like so many different things. You're probably already doing it. Are you connecting a mental health aspect to it? And are you being deliberate with the connection to mental health and well-being and employee listening and action? And then also make sure you're leveraging the resources available. Make sure you're getting the resources out that you have, whether it's your EAP, your benefits provider, additional resources. I know many organizations are providing to their teams. Leveraging all of those amazing free resources that now exist specific to the construction industry and even resources that exist, for the world at large to help address mental health. What can be tricky is folks aren't sure what to go to, what to leverage. So leveraging, and making sure it's easy to access and use those resources is really key. Get those resources in folks' pockets. I know Josh has heard me say this, I think 18 times now, but I don't care if we have to get in the house and give people information and resources by sneaking in the back window. If you can give someone resources by saying, hey, take this, put this in her phone in case your daughter needs it or one of your kids' friends need it, or just in case someone needs it. They have those resources at their disposal. And we don't need people to say, oh, I might need help. What we need is people to take those resources and have them available for those moments in need. So that's an okay step to take as well. So, in terms of the actions you can take specifically here, is train key team members on peer support, mental health, suicide prevention, etc. You can train team members on a variety of different things. And what's amazing is there are a ton of different trainings out there available. We have mental health first aid, that is, a very general approach to mental health overall, industry agnostic. We have QPR, we have Vital Cog. We have a lot of different resources we can look at as in terms of training team members to have those resources to take on peer support, to address suicide, different things. Make sure folks are prepared and you are thinking about the right training and the right time for your team. Make resources as easy to find as possible. How do your teams get information? What's resonating with them? What works? And find ways to use that avenue to get to folks. I know people sometimes say the best way to contact our teams is to send something home. We send a magnet home, we send a flyer home, we send text messages. Think about what information and getting the information, what works, and leverage that to make getting those resources to your team as easy as possible. And then lastly, find ways to drive community and positive relationships. A lot of times you'll hear people say, institute a buddy system, institute a mentorship program. Those are great options. Think about it in a broader stroke, though. How are you creating opportunities for connection within your organization, within your team? And think about that in a deliberate way and how you invest in those positive relationships. Because those naturally occurring positive relationships, those naturally occurring sense of community is powerful in terms of creating that peer support. And it will look different for each person and each organization. So, really key there. I know I mentioned training, and so I wanted to very briefly highlight something that we rolled out at the Wounded Workforce late last year, since it is relatively new. But we rolled out a new construction specific mental health certification called Building Resilience. And the idea here is to really focus on that kind of mental health 101 for the construction industry and making the terminology, the resources very construction specific. So think of that as a resource, a new resource for your teams, for folks, especially if they are less involved, less, deep in some of the work around suicide prevention, substance abuse, and overdoses. This is a great resource that we are currently offering. All of our facilitators do have a construction background. If you want to learn more, there's a QR code there that'll take you for more information as well. But do want to call that out as a new resource as it relates to training for team members as well. And lastly, when we look at changing culture, celebrate what we want to see. It sounds a little cheesy, I know, but reinforce resilience by rewarding it. How are you rewarding resilient behavior? How are you rewarding this sense of getting better, growing, doing better? Make sure you're showcasing that. And it is clear to people that that growth, that, oh, okay, things didn't go quite right. Oh, we're bouncing back. You're spotlighting that. So if there's a really challenging job that's maybe not going so well, don't just stop talking about it. Instead, talk about how the team is highlighting resilience and show that sense of, hey, we get it. Things don't always go right, and that's tough, but we can do better. We can be resilient, and that's how we succeed. And that will really help build that sense of resilience in your culture. It'll also really drive a sense of psychological safety as well, which is, I know, something that's, a very sexy term we like to bring up a lot now in the workplace, but it's really important and powerful there. You can also look at spotlighting mental health wins, spotlighting use of resources, stories, and it can be anything from people taking proactive action to someone sharing a lived experience. consider integrating a mental health KPI into reporting you may be doing. And again, this is one where you can look at a lot of different resources, but think about what resonates with your team, what resonates with your organization and culture already, and build from there. And then share stories that reflect your company values. Build that sense of resilience and tie it into cultural landmarks that already exist. So if you have a value around your people, sharing stories around people and resilience that reflects that people value and resilience is going to be really powerful and help kind of enhance those feelings and that support. If I can take away just a couple of things for you is remember as you're looking to build a resilient culture, culture change is hard. This is a big project and I don't want to undersell that, but it's absolutely worth doing. And I know I'm talking to a lot of people who are engaged in really big projects all the time. So remember that this is a journey and you will be working there over time. And a resilient culture is proactive, not reactive. Remember, we're shifting to a proactive approach to mental health and mental health support versus a reactive or crisis focused. And then last, it doesn't require perfection, just intention, follow through, and adjustments. None of us get it right all the time, and that's okay. What we want to make sure and do is make sure we are getting better every time and making things better for our team and the industry overall. So I would call each of you to action today is to choose a strategy to implement this month. Maybe talk about mental health at your next safety meeting, drive visibility, and make sure you're finding ways that folks can get access to tools and resources in an easy way. And with that, I will leave my contact information up for you. If you'd like to stay in touch, there is a QR code to subscribe to the Wounded Workforce. I promise we send maybe an email twice a month. And then if you want to reach out to me directly, there is my phone number, my email as well. But thank you all so much for your time. And I think we're going to open it up for some questions now.
Yeah, Stephanie, that was really, really helpful. I appreciate it. And I just want to say, as a CPTSD survivor and someone that lived with suicidal ideation for 20 years myself, what you're bringing to job sites and to our community is wildly helpful. And I'm super grateful to one, call you a friend and two, be engaging in this work with you.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Of course. All right, so let's take some questions.
And feel free to jump in the chat, drop a question. Um, nothing's off the table.
Well, I can get us started. So what are you seeing, as you're doing these trainings, what's coming up for folks that are in the construction industry that it might surprise us as viewers, right? Your boots on the ground, you're talking to people, you're getting reactions from them. What are you hearing from workers?
Yeah, so kind of an exciting thing is I think and I think it makes me feel good because it says, oh, Stephanie, I think you were onto something here. Is people are really more open to talking about this once we start changing the way we talk about mental health. So a lot of times, we do. I always joke and say, I want the cross-arm superintendent in my training. I want the person who's not necessarily open or excited about the training. And what I see is we start the conversation, we change the conversation around mental health and we changed the conversation around self-care. I like to talk about it as building resilience because I think self-care has like a little bit of like a Gwyneth Paltrow goopy, like go get a facial connotation in our society now. I'm waiting for Gwyneth to send me the cease and desist. I call her out all the time. But really, when we talk about self-care and talking about building resilience, there's a lot that folks already do. And I think having that sense and that connection is really powerful. So I talk about, fishing is mindfulness. Going for a ride in your Jeep, your motorcycle, that can be mindfulness. Going to the gym, eating healthy, spending time with your kids, that can be self-care. And I think it really reshapes like, oh, so this isn't like woo-woo. This is just like the stuff that makes me feel good, the stuff that kind of helps take care of myself. And I think it really reshapes that. And I'll go from having a room of people with those crossed arms to by the end of our session, folks are trying out box breathing or trying out a grounding exercise and really kind of changing that mindset. I think it's
Right.
back to that changing information. The other thing I want to call out is again, something not surprising to me, by and large, but the connection to families. I think something that is underlying the construction industry is this real passion around supporting families, making sure, my family has a better life than I had, which is just a really beautiful kind of energy. But I also think it's also a great entry point to have different conversations about mental health as we look at younger generations having different expectations and experiences around mental health, making sure we're talking about mental health and talking about resources as a way to support your family members can also be a great way, again, to get folks to recognize and to take more proactive action and change the conversation. Because how many folks do you know who, they're not going to do anything for themselves, but they are going to, jump through a ring of fire for their family. So I think that's a really interesting way to shape the conversation as well. And it really resonates with folks. Um, the other thing, the less exciting thing out there is that stigma is still really, really real. That
Yeah.
barrier is really hard, really heavy. And that's where I'm really, I know we've talked about it a lot, Josh. That's really where I'm focused on that work and making sure we focus on those folks to start to bring that stigma down. I see we have a
Yeah.
question that came in from Nicole. Thanks, Nicole. How long do you generally find that it takes for them to be able to open up and be vulnerable with your teams? I'm going to give you a classic HR professional and attorney answer. It depends. It really depends. It depends on a lot. It depends on your organization overall. It depends on the individual leader, kind of what they're bringing with them. Not to get too deep, but people who have had experiences of trauma or traumatic experiences, there may be something back there that's making it very hard for them to share. Um, Depending on your overall culture, if you have a very psychological, safe, trusting culture, that vulnerability is going to be a lot easier than a culture where it's not okay to make a mistake. And I think we've experienced, there's a wide range of experiences within the industry, even within projects, different job sites on how that feels. And that's where I really say focus on the vulnerability that makes sense for your team. So, hey, I messed up. Hey, I didn't do it right. Hey, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that right away, but let me go figure it out. That can be vulnerability too. And getting folks to start modeling that is a beautiful place to build from and get to that place of, maybe sharing their lived experience. I think sometimes we think about, okay, share your lived experience. Okay, get up on stage and talk about your mental illness, Stephanie. And that's a lot. But if we can find ways to be more vulnerable and start to build that psychological safety over time, we really get to a place where that starts to naturally happen. We start to feel comfortable. And you know how it feels like you meet a new person, you start to tell them things. You may be like, oh, let me see how this person is. Like push, 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 and find different ways to really leverage that. Great question.
Yeah, that was great. Looks like we got another one from Chris. What's your experience or thoughts with implementing a peer-based program within the organization?
I love peer-based programs. I think peer-based programs are phenomenal. I think the biggest thing around peer-based programs, and I would love for you to chime in on this one too, Josh, as I know you have some great experience here, is make sure your organization is ready for a peer-based program. So the thing is, there is, if you want to implement a peer-based program, really make sure the training and the structure is there and the funding is there, the support is there. So don't implement a peer-based program and then kind of roll it back. I would also say, explore how it will work. Kind of, roll that out. How does this work? Are we, trialing it on a specific job site? Are we rolling out across the board? I think really think about it, how it fits into your organization overall. And the folks who are there and ready to really champion it. Peer-based programs are amazing, but you really do need to have some champions within your organization that likely have lived experience and they're willing to be able to share that lived experience. So peer-based programs are phenomenal. It's not at the mental health 101 level, though. Some work should already have happened within your organization to get to a place to be more ready to talk about mental health. And I think really, again, that is so key. You can also leverage other peer support as well. Virtual connections, peer support in the community, things like that, as kind of a buffer between how that naturally kind of happens. Josh, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. What I would say is that, reach out to Stephanie or myself. We'll include our links in
Okay.
and when we send you that. And I'm happy to take a call with anyone that has questions and get you headed in
Yeah.
the right direction. It's really crawl, walk, run for me. So dip your toe in the water, see how it works, figure out, like once you get that feedback emotionally that it feels good and people are
Yeah.
happy, then you're like, oh, okay, well, let's take the next step and dig in
Yeah.
a little deeper. And Stephanie's training is probably the best way that I've seen to get that started. But so just to be cognizant of everybody's time, Stephanie, I want to say I'm elated that you're here and thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that joined us
Mm.
today. We're going to send you a recording of today's presentation, and so everybody will get that. And we encourage you to share it with your colleagues.
Yeah.
Don't just let it live on your hard drive, right? Send that out. Let people see what we're talking about here. Please visit constructionsuicideprevention.com. That's www.constructionsuicideprevention.com to find the resources and to register your participation. That's super important. Keep your eyes peeled for our next webinar, which will be on July 9th, and we'll send all that information to you as well. And if do you have any parting shots, Stephanie?
I would just say thank you all. I know that finding an hour in your day to have any conversation can be a lot. It is so heartening to see so many people engaged and wanting to do this work. It's truly an honor to have had an hour of your time today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm incredibly grateful for you and for the people that joined us today and everyone that's engaging in this work. It is what it's just so important for our communities in construction and outside of construction. Like you talked about, the families are suffering just as much or
Yeah.
more than the people within construction. So again, thank you for what you do. And thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.